Extract. 1. A short passage taken from a text, film, or piece of music. 2. A preparation containing the ingredient of a substance in concentrated form.
Email to Ranulph Glanville, 2012. As an introduction, to settle the context and ambitions of our practice, I would prefer to make exclusive use of fragments of past discussions and writings to evoke my state of mind, instead of writing a new text for the purpose of it. It would seem strange to me to write artificially about my intentions, when I can simply show them by arranging real fragments. Instead of having people believe what I say, I prefer to have them know what I think.
Comfort, 2019. What will future architects remember of us? What will the architecture of the first half of the 21st century be remembered for? I mean, globally, with a strong dose of generalization. How will we be labeled in the future? If this is right, then we may be labeled as producers of comfortable cultural products. Riskless anyhow, comfy temperatures, soft coolness, intellectual dilettantism, and from time to time a little bit of eco-social awareness. TUV approved, Instagram formatted. Let us be exemplary, engaging critically with our activity and physically with the resistance of the environment. Taking part in the making of architecture and to be part of the reality of architecture. Not falling asleep in optimal comfort, provided with cutting-edge equipment and surrounded by flows of exquisite images. Let us go back to the etymological roots of comfort, what makes you strong. Let us consider architecture as a comfortable construction, as an enhancing structure. Well, maybe that is the exact opposite of the Hobbit's understanding of comfort.
Mannerism 2018. Mannerism as the manner of an architect, as the condition of his or her recognizability. Mannerism as a sign of independent thought, free from any dogma. Perhaps is the superficiality of style also exactly this, a surface which is necessary to tighten volume. Complexity 2018. Hybrid programs on complex sites. This fundamental impurity obviously brings with itself a specific attitude. Progressivism 2018. Collective spaces, looking for spaces outside the comfort zone, for economically relevant proposals, but also for the pleasure of the spatial experience and, why not, pride, opposed to normed, secure habit. In this way, rather in dialogue with a context than articulated to the context.
Squares, 2009. Arbitrariness and randomness seem to have become a general condition in the contemporary society. As architects, how can we react to the multiplication of styles, approaches, and formalisms? Cultural identities have vanished in a thinned so-called globalized culture, or got sprawled in aggressive ultra-local regionalisms. There is a process ongoing of expanding of the possibilities, and at the same time a vanishing of their consistencies. The seeming failure of the urban offers an exceptional opportunity, a pretext for Nietzschean frivolity. The certainty of failure has to be our laughing gas or oxygen. Indeed, after decades of this Koolhaasian subversion, what makes today a high-tech bling-bling approach more or less valuable than a socio-participationist one? We are trapped by this situation. On the one hand, we can choose some style, adhere to it, adapt it, repeat it. But what is the relevance of applying a recipe? On the other hand, we can search for another unexisting style or approach, but then it will only become another possibility, an insignificant increment of the big global catalogue. One way out. not to choose, nor to invent formal approaches. In order to escape or to transcend the arbitrariness of form, we need to reduce formal choices to their minimum, if possible avoid form. Out of the formal chaos of the world, we need to reopen a space for pragmatism and necessity.
Savoir-faire, faire savoir. How to engage architectural practice as a research tool. 2018. When observing contemporary architecture as practitioner, as teacher, and as researcher, it has become difficult to grasp constitutive design rules. Even when some of these can be identified, their reach is often limited. The qualifiers for the word architecture have multiplied over time. Minimalist, hygienist, socio-participationist, formalist, high-tech, low-tech, sustainable and eco are some of the examples. After 1 century of avant-garde, architectural practice has been scattered in incontable styles and streams. This leads to a free market situation in which architects and teachers are confronted with an almost endless catalogue of approaches and styles. In this context, between multiple choice and pragmatist refusal, arbitrariness and relevance become a central issue. Today, the understanding of design processes is fundamental in the interpretation of architectural designs, since universal rules of composition, harmony, and common ideals, beauty, have failed to support them exhaustively. We explore ways of engaging the design expertise of an architect as an immersive research tool, allowing to recompose design processes and narratives of our projects.
Structure 2018. The permanence of structural orders and ephemeral details of the everyday, boldly striving towards the evidence of a natural phenomenon, modestly unnoticed in the use, but affirmatively present as an environment. Mimetism 2018. Projects that draw a distinction, that carry the possibility of their own identity, a restrained frivolity maybe. A possibly provoking kind of mimetism with the immediate surroundings, a very local form of solidarity. Criticism 2018. The construction site is the place where the critical potentialities of architecture emerge. Construction as driving force for new possibilities based on a radical rationality. On one side, an attitude enabling a coherent identity. On the other, the resistance of the reality.
For a Malherbe, Francis Punge, 1965. Indeed, they are utilitarian monuments, like the Pont du Gard.
Evidence 2020. It has become increasingly difficult to determine the relevance of artistic and architectural creations. All university vanished after the fragmentation that resulted from the avant-gardes, to a point that some may have suggested that market value was a lasting and stable marker. Since the second half of the 20th century, artistic and architectural productions progressively dissolved until the point that individual identity has become the main source of coherence. On another level, since more than a century, the scope of the available materials and constructive solutions has wildly increased, widening the scope of possibilities, while norms and regulations increased exponentially, reframing the role of the architect. In this context, it is useful to explore the conditions of relevance of architectural design in terms of action. As architecture is about change, it would be contradictory to reduce the conditions of operationality in the field to a unique and stable background, or as a set of structurally defined processes. However, these conditions may be illustrated and narrated, exploring the reasons why an architectural project developed in a certain manner, how an idea emerged, which forces lied behind a series of sketches, or which referential framework nourished the design.
Practice 2018. An architecture of practice, emerging from the practice. In the construction, obviously, but also in the design practice. Drawing plans, developing structural principles, working out details, studying contexts. Changing, adapting, needing, reworking, and then again. At some point, a sense of coherence emerges, a unity. Opportunity 2018. Looking for the unique, often hidden opportunities in the layeredness of the everyday and of the given. The site, the client, the program, the users, the regulations and the collaborations. Aiming at the efficient and effective development of these potentials.
Reflections 2008. When speaking of the internal processes of the making of architecture, architects handle something that is not problematic, not necessary, that has not failed, and that is not paradoxical in itself. In this aspect, their activity is fundamental and unavoidable but essentially superfluous. They stand in a schizophrenic situation in which what they do is necessarily unnecessary because it certainly has already been done in some way, and if not, when done, it becomes equivalent to any other solution. Simultaneously, designers can only exist through the confrontation with this impossibility of significance. This does certainly not happen through resignation and acceptation. As Albert Camus says, revolt is the only coherent philosophical position. It is the permanent confrontation of mankind with its own obscurity. It is the requirement of an impossible transparency. And Francis Ponge? Anyway, failure is never absolute.
Introduction to SMLXL. Rem Koolhaas, 1995. Architecture is a hazardous mixture of omnipotence and impotence, ostensibly involved in shaping the world. For their thoughts to be mobilized, architects depend on the provocations of others, clients, individual or institutional. Therefore, incoherence, or more precisely, randomness, is the underlying structure of all architects' careers. They are confronted with an arbitrary sequence of demands with parameters they did not establish, in countries they hardly know, about issues they are only dimly aware of, expected to deal with problems that have proved intractable to brains vastly superior to their own. Architecture is by definition a chaotic adventure.
Humanism 2018. Structures that seem to precede any use. The provocation of creative appropriation. They may look like ruins, a hardly recognizable purpose. Straightforward construction. Humanism through distanciation rather than expressivity, leaving air to breathe. Beauty 2018. This is not about a pleasant visuality. It is about precision in the observation and in the action. On the other side, ugliness is not the condition of relevance. This is more about the pleasure of a rough sharpness spiced with the relevance and frivolity, or the other way around. Pragmatism 2018. Keeping working until everything becomes active, until nothing could be taken away or cancelled. No minimalism, but a kind of raw pragmatism. A certain Stakhanovism too, in a design as well as on the construction side. No margins are left, a certain tension appears. Geometry 2018. Rationality in the construction goes hand in hand with a geometrical regularity, strong enough to remain autonomous whilst adapting a flexible design process. Geometry as the support of a resilient process. Geometry as the support of structure and construction. Perhaps also a kind of fascination. The infinite ambition of Francis Ponge. It is the mathematical beauty to which the matter of things is added, challenged by sensibility and brought to reason.
Energy 2019. Regarding grey energy. With a CO2 efficient heating system and unchanged comfort, after 10 years hemp insulation starts being slightly beneficial in regard of CO2 emissions. It takes over 15 years for mineral wool to catch the train. After 30 years, polyurethane seems still not to be interesting. If you simply turn off your radiators in several rooms and manage to reduce your consumption about 50%, it takes about 25 years for the most efficient insulation to stop being a bad climatic option. Following NIBA, mineral wool is better than line. What they do not calculate is if insulating is a good idea after all. While hearing this, you are probably wondering what lifespan can be expected from these insulating mattresses, airtight membranes, adhesive and double glazing. We could explore that. But at Agwa Architects, I notice that most transformations and refurbishments happen every 30 years, sometimes more, often less.
What is really circular? Recyclable materials in a new building? Or really consider what is present? Understand, appreciate, reinforce, reveal by extending the life cycle?
For Versa 2020. Cycling. The cyclist woke up early. He's pedaling his bike from Berck to Brussels, probably passing through Dines and Ghent. There certainly resides some pleasures in the repetitive movement, in the duration of the effort. Some strength of will is required too. Long stretches of the road have been patiently paved with cobblestones in a variety of patterns. A farmer drives his tractor in the fertile beet fields, his restless work modifying the surface of the earth with refined textures. Brick constructions are spread through the landscape as if emerging from the clay on which they rest. Then, of course, there is the asphalt covering the cobblestones, the noise of the highway in the distance, the heating of the greenhouses, the multiplication of the turnkey homes, the trains filled with laptop-equipped commuters. Materialism. Some visible distaste for ideas, or at least for their enunciation. A preference for the irrefutability of the work and of the absorbed time. The evidence of the result. No heroism, no affectation, no politics. But definitely the intelligence of the relevance of this attitude. Measure. Nothing remarkable or exceptional, out of scale or misplaced, except that such an attitude is exceptional, remarkable, and probably necessary.
Many architects who build offer a specific approach to the act of building, as if this was an inalienable aspect of architecture, feeding it from the first sketches. A possible stable ground to all built projects could remain in the act of construction. It seems to be useful to acknowledge and overcome the theoretical skin structure debate induced by Viollet-le-Duc and Gottfried Zemperer in order to focus on the making of architecture.
Isolation, 2020. Today, the animals and vegetables we eat are bred in factories in which no sun or ground is allowed. The goods we use are produced in conditions we prefer to ignore and are sold in sterile environments. The materials with which we construct proceed from a limited, standardized, and ubiquitous catalogue. Incessant travel completes the disconnection. Architects travel across the world, giving shape to aluminium curtain walls and plasterboard interiors. Architecture, once an isolating device in its anthropological and spatial function, becomes an ontological isolator between humankind and reality through the modalities of its production. Notions such as necessity and criticality are to be engaged if architecture is to mean something. Necessity as a lens to question the opportunities and the modalities of architecture. Criticality is the open-minded interrogation of this necessity and of the automatisms that surround us. A first step would be to question the countless labels with which architecture is qualified today, and the equal amount of tools that are supposed to quantify and regulate them. Zero energy, circularity, low-tech, cradle-to-cradle, low-carbon, reduce, reuse, recycle, flexibility, eco-sourcing. Labels may be useful, but they are by nature insufficient and problematic, were it only because of their advertising nature. It is intrinsically impossible to propose a way of making architecture able to solve the equation. Any recipe, when applied systematically, will always provoke an imbalance. However, the certainty of failure should not lead to unbearable inaction. Reading Camus in Le Mythe de Sisyphe, revolt would be the only coherent architectural attitude, the permanent confrontation with its contradictions.
Letter to D, a love story. André Tavares, 2006. I specifically did not want to write a book. I didn't want to deliver the results of a research, but to write up the research itself, as it was actually being carried out, with its nascent discoveries, its misses, its red herrings, its hesitant elaboration of a method never to be achieved, conscious of the fact that, when everything's said, everything remains to be said. In other words, it's the saying that matters, not the said. What I'd written interested me a lot less than what I might write next.
Autonomy 2018. Instead of an articulation with a context, looking for a certain autonomy and a careful positioning in this context. A kind of time inversion, projects that seem to precede the context, which seems to have grown around them.
Here, 2019. A few months ago at Agwa, we were working on a competition with Mouk Petzet, who curated Reduce, Reuse, Recycle for the German pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2012. At some point of a design workshop at the office, we were referring to a recent project in Brussels delivered by a Belgian architect. He wondered how it could be that we had not yet visited it. You architects in Belgium, you are the hot shit. Everyone is looking at you, and you do not even visit the projects next to your door, he said roughly. Well, that may be true, and it may be an issue. In October 2018, our first-year students were invited to travel to New York for their first study trip. New York! Have we gone crazy? On this topic, pages could be written about consumerism, democracy, equality of chances and privileges, about the civic irresponsibility to emit over 2 tons of carbon dioxide per person for a 1-week architecture tour. But maybe New York is really the place where every cultivated intellectual should travel to in 2018? A late equivalent of the young Englishman's grand tour through Europe in search of art, culture, and the roots of Western civilization in the 17th century? Well, fortunately for us, 2018 seems to be a time in which Belgian architecture is internationally observed and appreciated, for its perverse contemporary taste, for its ambiguous, engaged, multiple, intelligent history of architects and criticists, and for its material complexity, its layeredness, its quality of permanent laboratory. And still, our first-year students were invited to travel to New York. For an architecture student in Ghent or in Brussels, it would suffice to take a short-distance train or to rent a bike to explore an incredibly dense context and history. A 1-week trip to West Flanders, to Brussels, to Antwerp or Namur, or why not to Charleroi? Here, we could discover Yernaud and his hyperactive intelligence, the refined moderation of Laurent, the ample pragmatism of de Pelsenaire, the cultured modernism of André, and the sharp objectivity of Bourgeois, the formal hedonism of Le Borgne, and even some work by Van de Velde, who facilitated the foundation of the Bauhaus and founded La Cambre in 1926. Talk about architecture, urbanity, industry, economy and collectivity, growth and decrease. That would be a wonderful experience.
Scale Model 2018. The building as a scale model. Trying is allowed. Experimenting with arches and with bricks. Anticipation is not a condition. Perfection is not a need. A certain energy resides in the imperfection of the action. Normality 2018. Arbitrariness and heterogeneity seem to have become a new norm, an unthinkable normality. New chances appear in coherence and cohesion, clarity and effectiveness. Why not a step back as creative personalities?
Building further on what went before and beating new paths. An axonometry as a reinterpretation of a different drawing, which later, elsewhere, in a different practice, give birth to a collage. A working drawing which suddenly forms the ultimate expression of an architectural thought. A collage that is about tracking down the essence that it is all about. When it's about the work, the importance of sharing, curiosity, using, reusing, abusing, precisely to explore boundaries and stay sharp.
Representation 2018. A sudden lack of conventions, heterogeneity of the graphic production. Collages, models, pictures, drawings, renderings, CAD drawings. A sudden strictness, the careful choice of points of view, and more, the absence of human representation. Unadaptation 2018. The confrontation with unadapted, too big, misplaced structures. What do we do with them? The limitation of economical means. The change in scale towards the surroundings. Opening up, anticipating future uses. Redesign the existing. Insolubility 2018. An impossible corner. The encounter between two stacked volumes in one point. A technological impossibility. The inevitable default in the execution. The thickness of materials, an essential imprecision. Imperfection as the expression of an ambition.
Concretion abstraction, the place of design processes in today's architectural practice, 2015. Jacques Lucan makes the assumption that the term composition is no longer able to describe the architectural design process. He affirms that architecture does not respond anymore to compositional logics and objectives that make the necessary correspondence of the parts in the unity of the whole the understanding key of architecture. The issue of composition has always played a central role in architectural theory. According to Jacques Lucan, the traditional relationships between the parts ensuring the unity of the whole, which are embodied in the compositional rules and objectives, fail to give an exhaustive account of most contemporary design processes.
This book dissects the genesis of a project, it shares the doubts, it extracts the mechanisms that lead to choices, and it discovers the intuitions that make poetry. There are several reasons for this, some crises perhaps, but firstly, finding a form of innocence in the architectural discourse. While these discourses seem to freeze in the project's upstream, in a form that is a priori commercial which determines all the practice, how does one appreciate the manual and intellectual work that leads to the formulation of an architectural proposal? Diving into the heart of a project's development is also understanding the games and balances that find their place there. This is about the richness of an intellectual soil and about the refined know-how that brings it to life. It is also about the essential forces behind an oeuvre and the vacillation of an open-ended design process.
Hyperactivity 2018. Exploring all the possibilities, every context, every scale. There is no filter, no choice, no hidden agenda, no 5 years plan, no strategical move. An inextinguishable curiosity. The pleasure of the collaborations. Future 2018. Enriching and questioning the dictionary, looking forward to new collaborations. Explicitation as the first step of change, the menace of repetition and of habit. Exploring further and keeping experimenting. From there, the curiosity about what's next.